Hi and welcome to another tutorial. So today I'm going to look at creating simple macros. The first will be a title macro and the second will be this bevel text effect, which can be used inside Fusion. So first we're going to look at our title, so I'm going to bring the playhead over the Fusion comp with the title in it, select the comp and take it into Fusion. Once we get into Fusion, this is the node tree. I'm not going to go through how it was made. I'm interested in how we create the macro. If people want it, I can do tutorials to make titles. For this example, the only node we need to worry about is the text node. I've set it up so that all the controls can be accessed from that node. So the background colours reference the text node colour. So to start your macro, you decide which controls you want the user to be able to change. So basic text, style, colour. I also choose tracking, size, and in the layout tab centre. This allows the user to change font and reposition the text slightly if necessary. So to start our macro, we press and hold the control key or command key and we select our nodes with the ones we want to change first. So in this instance, the text node. So we select the text node first. With the command key still pressed, we then select all the others in any order. Now because this is a title, we need to include the media out node. For a macro for Fusion, you wouldn't necessarily need to do that. So once you have all your nodes selected, right click on a node, go to macro and create macro, and this really scary window pops up. It's actually not too scary. This allows you to make various controls available to the end user. So the first thing we need to do is at the top type in a name for our new macro. As you see, because we selected it first, the text node is at the top of our list, and then you've got all the other nodes in the tree following it. If we open our text node, we don't need to worry about the image section, so we can twizzle that closed. The next section is text. So here we're going to check the controls that we want the user to be able to change. If you remember when we were looking at it earlier, you can actually click on the nodes in the node tree to bring them up in the inspector as a aid memoir, if you like. So we said we wanted the style text, the font, the style and the colour. Now you need to note that where it says colour here, this is actually the red component of your RGB colour wheel, if you like, but it's also used as a label, hence it says colour. What you can, if you're on a more complex macro, what I would do is change the text so that you know what colour it's referencing, so in this case text colour. Then you check the green and blue, size and tracking. If we then close the text group, you see the layout group, and if you remember we said we wanted the center, so again check the center. For this particular macro, that's all the controls we need. So if you click close, you get a dialog asking if you want to save. Click yes. Now by default, Fusion saves all macros to a macro folder, but in this instance we don't want the macros folder, we want the titles folder. On a Mac, that can be found, sorry I'm just tidying it up. On a Mac that can be found following these steps: Macintosh HD, Library, Application Support, BlackmagicDesign, DaVinciResolve, Fusion, templates, edit, and then title, and this will save our new title into that folder. Now, in an ideal world, your title would be available, but we don't live in an ideal world. We live in DaVinciResolve, and DaVinciResolve dictates that to activate our new macro or title, we have to close DaVinciResolve and restart it. So having restarted Resolve, if you now come over to your effects library, if it's not selected, just click the icon at the top, go to titles, and you'll see lots of Fusion. Well, I've got lots of Fusion titles, so to make it easier, I'm going to use the search function to find our new test title, which is here. If you now click and drag that above your video clip, move your playhead over, like most titles, you need to give it just a second to cache. So once it's cached, you can then play it through, and you'll see that we have our title. If you look to the right in the inspector, you can see that we have the limited number of controls that we set. So you can change your text, font, color, etc. And as I say, you've got size, tracking and centering so that you can fine tune where your text appears in your title. And that is basically your text macro. So next we will have a look at the Bevel tool. Okay, so once again we put our playhead over the Fusion comp that we're interested in and bring it into Fusion. Now, as you can see, this comp is slightly more complicated, and we've got controls in several, or in a couple of different nodes. We have controls in the shader node here, and we have controls in the blur node. So for the shader, we're going to need all these controls and all these controls. For the blur node, we basically just need the blur size. We may or may not include the filter type, I don't know yet, but it's not essential. So again, we need to work out what we need. So what we don't need is these last two nodes, which are the media out and the color curves, and we don't need the input. What we do need is this little square at the beginning, which is a pipe router. Basically all that does is it lets us take one input and split it into two, and the user doesn't need to worry about having two inputs then. So again, press down your command key and select the nodes you want to change first. So the pipe router, the shader and the blur node. After that you can select the rest of the nodes in any order you want. Again, right click, macro, and create macro. Give our macro a name. So again, if you look at your list, the nodes we selected first are at the top. So you've got your pipe router, and for this you need to select the input so that our user has somewhere to input the text to. Once you've done that, you open the shaders, and basically for the shader, if you remember, we needed pretty much everything. So from light down on our list, we will select all these controls. So ignoring the first 4 and then including everything else. And then we look for our next node, which was our blur node. And if you remember, we said that we needed the blur size, and the filter's kind of optional, but we'll put it in so that people can choose what filter they want. We don't need to mess with anything else other than the filter and the blur size. Which controls you pick will depend on what the macro does and what you want the user to be able to do. And once you've selected all your controls, you're good to go. Again, close. Yes, we do want to save. This time we want to go to the macros folder, which handily Resolve does by default. However, the macros folder that it defaults to is through a user specific path. I tend to keep all mine in a sort of general folder that's accessible to all users. If you just pause and go back over the sort of save process there, you can see the path that I used to get to the macro folder, and I'll put it on screen as well. So again, we have to do the ritual quit and restart. Now for this we can't just drag it onto the timeline like we did with the title, because it's a macro that's used in Fusion. So if you put a new Fusion comp onto your timeline, go into Fusion, and just for the sake of a demonstration I'll stick a text node in with something totally humble. And assuming this was an actual piece of work, we'd resize the text, lay it out how we wanted it. We would then bring in our new macro. Now there's several ways you can do this. If you go into the effects library, tools and macros, scroll down your list, you will eventually find our homemade bevel. You can also right click in your flow window, add tool, macros, and again it's on the list. The way I prefer to do it is shift spacebar, or I think control spacebar on a PC. Brings up your search tool or select toolbox. You can search for whatever you want, select it and add it. Now we have this nice little compact macro, which we can put an input to and an output from, and it gives the effect that we wanted. It's customizable and various parameters can be changed via the inspector. And you can use it as you would any other node in the Fusion tab. If you're interested in making this bevel tool, it was from a tutorial by David Cohen at Learn Now Effects. I'll stick a link in the description for it. And as I say, if people are interested in knowing how I make titles, get in touch with me and I'll sort something out. You can either leave a comment here, or I also hang out on Jake Whip's DaVinciResolve Discord server, and I'll leave a link to that below as well. So this is just showing using the tool. So I've just quickly added in the color curves tool so that you can see that we get somewhere approximating what we had for the demonstration. And yeah, that's kind of how making a simple macro works. So all this becomes one node, and the end user doesn't need to worry about what's inside it. All they need to worry about is which bits they can control or not control. So I hope you found it useful. Like, subscribe and all that kind of malarkey. Thanks for listening to me waffle, and hopefully see you again soon.